From bureaus worldwide, this is FSN.
Thanks very much, Ollie Barrett. It's approaching 3 minutes past the hour. That means it's time for the Richie Allen Show. It is July 18th, 2019, Thursday. Lovely afternoon in Salford and Greater Manchester. So much to tell you in so little time.
Welcome back to the most listened to independent radio show in Europe. It's your Richie Allen Show. It's the Richie Allen Show. Broadcasting live on richieallen.co.uk and multiple platforms around the world. And now, here's your host, Richie Allen.
Now, the singer, songwriter, political investigative journalist himself, Johnny Vedmore, joins the program in the second hour. You don't want to miss that. We're going to be talking about Jeffrey Epstein, and we're also going to be talking about a woman who Johnny reckons is a real-life Bond girl. Tell you all about that when Johnny Vedmore joins the program in the second hour. Some of the connections between Jeffrey Epstein and the intelligence agencies of the West. It's really important stuff. Before that, we'll be joined by Paul Craig Roberts, the former Assistant Treasury Secretary, of course, under Ronald Reagan. It's been a while since Paul was on the program. We welcome him back this hour. It is Thursday's Richie Allen Show, live on Fab Radio 2, triggerwarning.tv, my website, TuneIn Radio, and you can talk to me through Twitter. It's at Richie Allen Show on Twitter. So talk to me, or forever hold your peace, god damn it. So Johnny Vedmore, yeah, top man, the Swamp.Media. The Swamp.Media. Don't miss that in the second hour. PaulCraigRoberts.org for Paul's articles. Wonderful writer. We'll be chatting about some of the latest articles published by Paul on his eponymous website. The Office for Budget Responsibility is the UK spending watchdog, and the Office of Budget Responsibility has been telling us today that if we leave without a deal, if we leave the European Union without a deal, well, we're all screwed next year and we'll be in recession. Surprise, surprise. Come on, children, sing it with me. Hits you between the eyes. Oh yeah.
The unpredictable.
That's the surprise you see. Surprise, surprise. Yes, these lawyers have been promising financial Armageddon ever since before the referendum in 2016. Scaremongering lawyers. They're liars, to be sure. Their pantses are on fire. Liars. We'll have a recession if we come out of the European Union with no deal, they're saying. You know, we can't leave with no deal. Nobody leaves anything by doing a deal first. In any walk of life, you just leave, don't you? Leaving me membership and I'm leaving. So the Office of Budget Responsibility is basing their dodgy forecast on the belief, dear listener, that the European Union would levy a 4% charge on UK goods after we've left. It's zero at the moment, of course, because we're a member. Would the European Union do that? Would the EU do that? Well, they'd be scoring an own goal because they sell more to us than we sell to them. Oh, levy a 4% charge on us, would you? Well, we'll see that pettiness and we'll raise it. Massive propaganda, though, this nonsense, and the UK media is, as usual, pushing it. Listen to this disgraceful report from Sky News economics editor Ed Conway. This is pure propaganda.
Well, I think a lot of focus at the moment on what the impact of no-deal Brexit could actually be. And we heard a little bit earlier on from the Office of Budget Responsibility. They are the arbiters of what's going on in the public finances. So every time we have a budget, every time there's an official government forecast, it is the OBR's numbers that we look at. And they have said that if there were to be a no-deal Brexit, and they've picked out one particular forecast of what happens for the UK economy, they've looked at what the IMF is saying, then they say the impact on the public finances could be very severe indeed. A £30 billion a year increase in borrowing. You could see the national debt going up to about £2 trillion. And it's worth just kind of...
That's my bull. That's me doing a bull, making a bull noise. When when they're lying through their teeth.
Kind of remembering, we are towards the end of this leadership race. A lot of talk at the moment about extra tax cuts that could happen, that spending increases could happen. Well, the OBR is just underlining that if there is a no-deal Brexit, then the amount of money that you have to actually spend diminishes so much that really it's not clear that there is this pot of gold that the candidates are talking about. So it's an intervention, really, and an underlining of the fact that there will not be easy decisions, particularly if the UK leaves without a deal. There could be some big consequences. And bear in mind, Kay, this is actually not the worst case scenario you could imagine. There are many other worst case scenarios.
It could be even worse, Kay, than the OBR is saying. Oh dear.
Scenarios that you could look at, including what Philip Hammond was talking about as well, about a £90 billion impact. Final point.
Philip Hammond, because you can believe Philip Hammond, right?
Point, though, I mean, you'll remember we heard Jacob Rees-Mogg saying in a newspaper article just earlier on this week, actually, it could be a positive windfall from no deal. There could be an £80 billion windfall as a result of it. Well, remember, that is essentially the forecast from one economist among hundreds. There are hundreds of economists out there in the UK. Almost all of them say it would be negative if there were a no deal. There would potentially be a recession. Certainly the economy would suffer and the public finances would suffer. There is a single one economist in Cardiff University, Patrick Mimford, who says the opposite. So it's worth putting that into perspective.
It is, because that is propaganda dressed up as journalism by Ed Conway, Sky's economics editor. That's crap. Unchallenged, of course, by the dim-witted and ham-fisted Kay Burley. Totally unchallenged. It isn't true that just one economist says we'll thrive if we leave the European Union. There are many. I'm not going to name them. I've named them and I've interviewed them on this programme in the last 3 years. Dreadful stuff. MPs also backed a bid today to stop any new Prime Minister suspending Parliament to force through that no-deal Brexit. As for Boris Johnson, what an insufferable goon. Did you see this today? In a hustings which was carried out live on television last night, Boris claimed that the European Union forces producers to use plastic ice pillows when transporting kippers. It's expensive and it's very bad for the environment, said Boris Johnson. Sadly, Johnson is a muppet. It's codswallop. See what I did there? It's codswallop. This is what Johnson actually said. For once he's not lying, he was just too stupid to check the facts. Boris Johnson.
I want you to consider this kipper.
Kipper.
This kipper, which has been presented to me just now by the editor of a national newspaper, who received it from a kipper smoker in the Isle of Man, who is utterly furious because after decades of sending kippers like this through the post, he has had his costs massively increased by Brussels bureaucrats who have insisted that each kipper must be accompanied by a plastic ice pillow. Pointless, expensive, environmentally damaging elfin safety.
Yeah. What a clown. Sky Europe correspondent Mark Stone explains why Johnson is a prize tit and why he was in fact done up like a kipper. Here's the truth.
He's been talking cobblers, Kay. It's nonsense what he claimed last night. It was clear to some of us last night that it seemed to be slightly odd. I think multiple layers of nonsense is more accurate. I mean, first of all, the Isle of Man isn't in the European Union. It's not part of the United Kingdom. And so to use that example seems odd, given that the Isle of Man isn't in the European Union, and yet it is still doing this. And there's another problem, that it isn't EU regulation, it's British regulation, which requires ice pillows to accompany kippers or smoked fish when they are sent from the Isle of Man, not in the United Kingdom, to the UK. The UK is the United Kingdom. So he's talking nonsense, frankly, Kay, and that much was summed up by the European Commission spokesperson on food safety.
Yeah, nonsense. You know, I said it before. Anybody who thinks that Boris Johnson is really going to deliver the United Kingdom from the European Union, it's an absolute nonsense. Johnson is a nonsense. Anyway, the Labour Party sacked Baroness Diane Hayter. That is a wonderful surname. Hayter. Hotel Alpha Yankee Tango Echo Romeo Hayter. She's a critic of Corbyn on antisemitism. And she compared him to Hitler, apparently. compared him to Hitler in the film The Bunker. No, in the film Downfall, yes. She compared him to Hitler and referenced Downfall. So she was sacked as Brexit minister, this Baroness. Yeah. And Labour peers could hold a vote of no confidence in Jeremy Corbyn. They might do. It won't make any difference because it's just an expression of opinion. It's not binding. So there is widespread anger, apparently, at the sacking of Baroness Hayter after she compared Corbyn's approach to that of Adolf Hitler in Downfall. Yeah. She was on The World at 1, Radio 4 this afternoon, lunchtime. She was on the World at 1 programme, Radio 1. Here she is, Baroness Diane Hayter. Notice the Radio 4 presenter hasn't got the balls to ask her why she was comparing Jeremy Corbyn to Hitler.
The report was carried in HuffPost about comments that you had made. So they had not called you to check whether you made those comments?
Oh, no, not at all.
But you did make them.
Well, somewhat out of context. Can I just take a moment to say, I was talking about, I'm a historian, sorry about
Out of context.
that, about a very good book by Barbara Tuchman called The March of Folly. And she looks at the fall of Troy and Vietnam and other great disasters that have happened.
Tell the truth, love. You compared him to Hitler, come on.
Because a leader has not taken into the sort of top leadership information and intelligence, contrary to what people think the leader wants.
The BBC 4 presenter must stop the waffle there. That's your job. And say, with respect, Baroness Hayter, you did compare him to Hitler, didn't you?
And so I was actually talking about denying or not listening to, if you like, outside advice or outside criticism. And some people looking big, they hadn't read the book. And I said, well, watch Downfall, because actually it's much the same in that film, because you've got the bunker where information...
Hitler's bunker, yeah, you compared him to Hitler.
...is coming in, not getting through. So it is true I was referring to the last days of Hitler. But actually, of course, what I was referring to...
was Hitler, and that Corbyn is like Hitler in the bunker.
...was the well-known... historically.
And the BBC presenter will not say a word.
That if leaders don't hear criticism, they're not able to do their project. I go on to say that if we can adapt...
Oh, shut up, love. Shut up, love. You misogynistic bastard, Richie. She compared him to Hitler. And it's incumbent on the BBC presenter to say if the roles were reversed and a Corbyn supporter compared a woman in the Labour Party to Hitler, there'd be murders. Incumbent upon the BBC presenter to say that. But BBC presenters are, they are as useless as creatures who lie on their backs at the bottom of ponds waving their arms and legs around. Useless. Utterly useless. Let's move on. Let's move right on. There's a bit of a war going on. Thankfully not yet a hot war, and let's hope there never will be a hot war. But the Iranians might have taken a tanker back in retaliation for the tanker that was stolen on them off the coast of Gibraltar. Iran says it seized the foreign tanker and its 12 crew on Sunday. Iran state television actually quoted the Iranian Revolutionary Guard saying the ship had been smuggling 1 million litres of oil. Right, so the Iranians took a ship and said it was smuggling oil, and it's announced this on state television. Now, it's not yet been confirmed if it is a ship based in or a ship that came from the United Arab Emirates that stopped transmitting its position on Sunday. So an Iranian-based tanker, Richie, say it again, UAE-based tanker was travelling through the Strait of Hormuz on Sunday, stopped transmitting. We're not sure if that is the tanker that has been intercepted by Iran. Right. So it might be tit for tat. The Iranians might be fighting back. Here's Sky News' Dominic Waghorn, diplomatic editor on this story.
Well, we had a tanker over the weekend that went missing. The MT Ria was wandering around that sort of pinch point you could see to the south of Larak Island. And the tracking information we have for it now is that this smaller tanker was going between tankers, shuttling it seems, but not going to port for 6 months, which is very odd, suspicious behaviour. It was last seen going into or heading towards Iranian waters, and then it switched off its transponder or whatever it is that sends off pings that people can track. And
How
since
do you do
then,
that?
Exactly, and that is also suspicious. So it's gone missing. We then have the Iranians saying that they have seized a foreign tanker, but they won't identify the tanker or show pictures of it. So highly likely it's a tanker that went missing. But the Iranians had said over the weekend that they had sort of come to its rescue. They were towing it to port to repair it. They're now saying that they have seized a foreign tanker suspecting of oil smuggling. Now, if it's the same tanker, it's kind of compatible with that strange movement of shuttling between tankers, suspicious behaviour. The Iranians may simply have seized it. Why are we talking about it? Because we're not really a tanking news channel. Because this tanker went missing off Gibraltar. This tanker was seized off Gibraltar, nothing to do with this as far as we know. The Grace 1 was seized by British and Gibraltarian authorities, a much bigger tanker. And since that seizure, the Iranians have been very angry about it. Most recently, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader, has said he wants to settle scores with the UK.
Oh. What was that, Kay? The Ayatollah Khamenei wants to settle scores with the UK. What did Kay say?
No.
Kay's horrified.
No.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Is that all you can say?
No.
Kay is horrified at the supreme leader of Iran.
No.
But Waghorn took the biscuit, didn't he? Dominic Waghorn, the diplomatic editor. He told you in that little clip all you need to know about Sky News. Do you want to hear him telling you? Here he is.
Why are we talking about it? Because we're not really a tanking news channel.
Because we're not really a tanking news channel.
Why are we talking about it? Because we're not really a tanking news channel.
Yeah, we're not really a tanking news channel.
What kind of fuckery is this?
You are. Sky News is tanking. Thank God. The media in general is tanking.
Why are we talking about it? Because we're not really a tanking news channel.
You are. It's approaching 20 minutes past the hour. My name is Richie Allen. Hope you're having a fantastic Thursday. Thanks for choosing the Richie Allen Show. Broadcasting live right now on Fab Radio 2, triggerwarning.tv, TuneIn Radio, and of course richieallen.co.uk. All right. Oh, it's lovely to be with you. This is Tom Jones. Paul Craig Roberts is up after this. What a tune this is. Oh, it takes me back, it does. Yeah, 21 minutes past the hour. Tom Jones on the Richie Allen Show. Greater Manchester. Temperature about 26 degrees. It's lovely. It's lovely. My first guest is a great friend. I love the man. It's been ages since we had a chat. Too long, in fact. But a lot of things got in the way. I don't need to tell you too much about him. He's an economist, he's a terrific author and a great, great journalist. You can read him regularly at paulcraigroberts.org. I do recommend that you bookmark the website paulcraigroberts.org. Of course, he's a very distinguished man, formerly, of course, a US Assistant Secretary of the Treasury. Let's welcome back to the programme our friend Paul Craig Roberts. Paul, thanks for coming back on. How are you?
Hey, just fine. It's always nice to talk with you.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for coming on. It's been ages and lots to chat about. Again, folks, paulcraigroberts.org. Love reading you, Paul. That's not sycophancy. I love reading you. You've been talking a lot. You've been writing a lot lately about free speech, freedom of speech. You're very concerned with what's going on at the US university or US universities at the moment. We can talk about that. I'd love to get your thoughts on that. But I've got to ask you from the get-go. The BBC is reporting today that the Iranians may have seized an oil tanker that Iran says may have been smuggling oil through the Strait of Hormuz, and it might have originated in the United Arab Emirates. Some are speculating that Iran is basically implying a bit of tit for tat. If you steal or hijack one of our oil tankers, we might do the same to you. I know you're all over this story, Paul, and what's happening in the Middle East. How concerning is what's happening in general there at the moment to you?
Well, Richie, I think that the state of Israel will continue to try to force the United States into destabilizing Iran. The United States, of course, is completely susceptible to the pressures from the Israeli state. And so you never know who's behind any of these instances, though I suspect it's the Israeli state trying to produce some kind of event that will result in the United States making some sort of military attack, which the Israel will hope can be continued or can destabilize the Iranian state and leave it in chaos like Libya and Iraq and like they intended Syria to be. So that's about all I can say about it. I think the Iranians, for the most part, will be cautious because even though Russia and China backed them diplomatically, Russia and China would not be pleased if the Iranians become as provocative as the Americans and the British. So I really can't say that this was tit for tat on the part of Iran. I don't know why they would care. I mean, how do you smuggle oil?
Yeah, good question.
Who's smuggling it? You know, it just sounds funny to me. Who's smuggling the oil out? Now, if somebody's smuggling the oil out, it suggests to me that somebody's violating the American sanctions. So why would Iran care if somebody's violating the American sanctions and has to smuggle oil out? So the whole thing, I think, look, there was a long article the other day. I think I posted it. I don't remember the source of the article, but it gave, I know what it was. It was an interview with a former senior editor of the BBC for 35 years. And he said the BBC serves as nothing but propaganda organ for the Israelis. That's all the BBC is. It doesn't do anything else except spout Israeli propaganda. So that's what their own senior editor for 35 years said about them. And so whatever the BBC says, I don't ever regard it as anything but some kind of propaganda on behalf of some Israeli or Washington agenda.
Good stuff, Paul. That article that you did very well to amplify, because when it gets onto paulcraigroberts.org, it's got a great chance of being seen by many people. It was actually Gilad Atzmon, who's a great friend of mine, and Gilad interviewed that BBC editor. It is completely and utterly genuine, and he did say the very things you attributed to him, that the BBC is a mouthpiece for Zionism and the Zionist agenda. Just to leave Iran then, Paul, what is it positive that the US President Donald Trump seems to have had a bit of a falling out with, or has lost interest in, John Bolton? Because there isn't anybody currently in DC more hawkish and more intent on war than John Bolton. And it seems that Trump has gotten a bit fed up of listening to Bolton. Maybe that's a positive thing. What do you think?
Oh, yes, if he's fed up with Bolton, that's definitely a positive thing. You know, all of this Russiagate business, it could very well end up playing into Trump's hands, because we now know that everything in the Mueller report is totally false. You know, all the charges of Russiagate are totally false.
Yeah.
You know, Mueller himself said there was no collusion. And his indictments, though, of the Russians have now been thrown out by a U.S. federal district judge who said, look, Mr. Mueller, there's no evidence in here for your indictment, and you're using your assertion as evidence, and that's not evidence in the court of law. And so you stop talking about having found Russians meddling in our election, because there's no evidence of that in your report. So all of that's gone now. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
the whole thing's falling apart. And we now have definitive proof that there was no Russian leak to Julian Assange or WikiLeaks, that it came directly out of the Democrat National Committee in the form of a thumb drive, because they can measure the download speed, and it vastly exceeds anything possible over the internet. So it couldn't have been hacked. This has now been proved by William Binney, who was the senior manager of the National Security Agency, the man who developed and implemented the spy program. So the whole thing's falling apart. We know that Comey, the former FBI director, that Brennan, the former CIA director, that members of the Obama Department of Justice were all in a conscious, intentional conspiracy to discredit Donald Trump. We know that we have all kinds of evidence. They committed felonies. They took bogus evidence to the FISA court in order to get warrants. This is a felony. It's endless. And so it could well be now that there's going to be retribution, that Trump is going to have all of these people arrested, indicted, and put on trial. The Democrats aren't helping. They tried to impeach Trump yesterday. They only got 95 votes. They had almost 400 against.
Why do you think that is?
What?
Why do you think that is, Paul? Why do you think the Democrats had such a poor turnout? Well, not a poor turnout, but why did so many not take the opportunity to impeach Trump?
You know, I think a lot of people went along with Russiagate and the anti-Trump stuff because they thought it would make them a little bit, put them in a more powerful position, you know, that they would have more influence in the government and so on. But when they see now, as anybody with any sense sees, that the whole thing was a hoax, do they want to take a risk of pushing something now known to be a hoax when they don't know what Trump's going to do, what reports are coming out of the Justice Department about Russiagate, this orchestration? So I think they're just staying away until they see what happens. You know, they don't want to get out there and get mixed up with the people who are going to go to jail or who might go to jail.
Who might do, yeah. And you think, sorry, Paul, you think that whatever I might think of Donald Trump and how he's influenced by the Israeli government, whatever I might think about him, I'm no fan of his. So I'll park that to one side. You think that because of his part in this, Mueller must be charged with conspiracy to overthrow the president. You're very strong on that point.
Well, I believe in justice.
Yeah.
And not Donald Trump. But I think it's a mistake for somebody to say, oh, I hate Trump so bad, I don't care if they do him an injustice.
Yes.
Because once you take that position, the law is corrupted and it can do injustice to anybody.
Absolutely.
So my position is, whether you like Trump or don't like him, that's not the reason you would acknowledge the facts about Russiagate. You would acknowledge the facts about Russiagate because it is a threat to everybody. And once the national security state can frame up a president, they can frame up anybody. And once if they'd gotten away with framing a president, nobody is safe. So it's a justice matter and it's a liberty matter. So even if Trump was the worst person on the face of the earth, I would still say, well, look, you have to go by the facts. And the facts are Russiagate was an orchestrated hoax. And it was perpetrated on the American people, on the world, with malevolent intent. And all kinds of felonies were committed. And so the people, even though they are high and mighty people, have got to be held accountable. That's my position.
Yeah, it's fair. It's absolutely right. People shouldn't be partisan when it comes to justice. It doesn't matter whether you like somebody or not, because it could be you. Next, Dr. Paul Craig Roberts is our guest. paulcraigroberts.org for terrific articles. Paul's own thoughts on what's happening in the world right now, but he's very generous and publishes contributions from guests as well. Very good stuff, very well briefed. paulcraigroberts.org. Before we talk, I mean, there's always brilliant stuff on. I was reading last week or over the weekend a piece that you wrote about the collapse of truth in the West, a very interesting piece. You referenced some craziness that's going on in the UK with regards to the doctor and the transgender person. We might just talk about that a bit later on. But about this big row that's blown up between, no better man than you to give me the lowdown here. You have these four women in the Democratic Party, these congresswomen. Some of them have said some very interesting things in the last 6 months that I would agree with, you know, refreshing things on Israel's power in DC, the Israeli lobby. We're talking about Ilhan Omar and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and we're talking about two other women whose names escape me at the moment. But they've had this big argument with Trump about racism and Trump telling them to go home. How do you see that, Paul? Is this just distraction nonsense in the media that doesn't mean anything to deflect our attention away from more important matters? Or are these women worthy of mention? Are they interesting women politically? What do you think?
Well, I think the reason we're hearing so much about it is it's the media, the print and TV media, the prostitutes, as I call them, the media whores. They're trying to do any and everything to discredit Trump. So if 4 dark-skinned members of Congress call Trump a racist, they want everybody to know that. So I think that's the basic explanation of why you're hearing about it. Now, there are other aspects to it. I agree with you that some of these women have said some very interesting and even courageous things.
Yeah.
And I was thinking that in some sense, we're fortunate to have them because they're willing to say some things other people aren't willing to say. And whether the things are right or wrong, at least it makes an opening in the establishment-controlled information. So I said, okay, let them go on. Now, I think what's happened is they've gone too far. And I think the reason they went too far is they realized, or they came to the conclusion from the dispensations they get that a white male would not get, to shoot their mouth off and to call people names, that they are, because they are female and dark-skinned, they've got like an aristocratic position in which they can attack people that they would not be able to do if they were a white male. And so realizing this power, I think they've now overstepped the line, because there's no basis for them calling Trump a racist. You're not a racist because you want to defend your borders. If you aren't willing to defend your borders, you don't need a military. You don't need any soldiers.
Yeah.
So I think that they just went too far. And I think that one of them, the woman from Somalia, if she said what she said to have said, that more or less that she's proud of Al-Qaeda or ISIS or whatever that group is, this is a bit much for a member of the Congress to say.
I'm not sure she did. I've been looking high and low for any evidence of that, and I can't find it. Can I put it to you that when he says, go back to your countries and sort them out, and then he revels while his audience are saying, send them home. Now, I'm not saying this, Paul, but could it be argued that that is racist, that Trump is treading a very fine line there into xenophobia? He shouldn't say stuff like that. He's the president at the end of the day. What do you think?
Well, I don't know. I think maybe not, because the American people are tired of being constantly called racist, tired of constantly being attacked by people they allowed to come here. You see, this was a country of European descent. The core population was white. And somehow it's welcomed all these people, and somehow all these people have a sense of entitlement. And instead of assimilating, they carry on constant warfare against white people. Everything they say is hostile.
Some of them, anyway. Not all of them.
People get tired of being people born here. People, they think of it as their country. They think of these people as newcomers. And they're tired of being called names by them all the time. And finally, Trump realizes that people are sick and tired of it and stood up for the core population. And he's the only one anywhere in the West, other than Putin, that has stood up for the core populations of their country. Look at the UK. All of your political leaders always take up for the immigrants, whether they're legal or illegal. They always take their side.
They do.
And they always take the side of some weird somebody, some transgendered somebody, or nobody else counts. No normal, white, traditional person counts anywhere in the UK, the US, England, France. They're all browbeat, demonized, yelled at, accused. And people are tired of it. And I think that's all Trump is responding to.
You made a good point in one of your articles this week that the white man or the white woman is somebody that you can say anything about at any time. But any other group of people that you might want to criticize in some way, they tend to be off limits. And I endorse what you say about the conduct of politicians. I ultimately believe that most of this is divide and conquer. They don't want us to know, what's really happening in the world. And the way to keep us distracted is for us to kill one another and fight with one another on identity issues. And I know you've written about that before. And I want to endorse that. To read these articles, folks, go to paulcraigroberts.org. Read these articles, share them online, because it's sadly the sort of thinking and opinion that we're not getting anymore on the BBC or on Sky News or on CNN. And whether you agree with Paul or not is irrelevant. You need to expose yourself to a different thinking. You brought up the transgender thing because you're a little bit older than me. And again, this is not to patronise you. I do sometimes think, what do my parents and my uncles and aunts think about this sort of story? I know you picked up on this. When a reputable doctor who's provided public service through the National Health Service for many years, thank God we have the National Health Service, at least we still have it, where people can go and get treated and get medicine if they need it, and it's paid for through taxation, so they don't have to worry about going bankrupt because they get sick, and it's a great thing. But here you have this doctor, and Paul wrote about this this week or over the weekend, and he was asked in an assessment if he was ordered basically to refer to a 6 foot tall man with a beard as madam, and the doctor said no, and he was promptly suspended, and he's taken a case to the High Court. And to give you your credit, Paul, yes, journalists in this country, including Piers Morgan, who came after Larry King, Piers Morgan called this doctor a bigot on national television the other morning. Do you sometimes think, Paul, that we're living in some parallel universe when you hear this stuff? It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, I think Piers Morgan just shows that he is a media whore, and he goes along with the ideology that's being imposed on people who don't believe it.
Yeah.
And, the same thing happened to the other day to a young PhD candidate at the University of California. She is in the Department of Feminist Studies, so she's a feminist. She has all these feminist credentials. She's a PhD candidate, a teaching assistant. And she said, not in the classroom, but on a tweet, that it's not possible to be born into the wrong body. In other words, it's not possible that you're a woman and you're born into a man's body, and therefore you declare yourself to be a woman. She says it's not possible to be born in the wrong body. You are the body you're born in. And that's her opinion on tweet. Well, she's been completely excoriated. They want to kill her for expressing an opinion. So what we have come to is this. If you're one of these privileged classifications, an alleged minority, which in actual fact in the world are vast majorities, it's the whites who are minorities. If you're one of them, if you're a homosexual, a lesbian, some transgender something, then you can impose your view on everybody else, because if they oppose your view, it proves they're a bigot, they're transphobic, they're homophobic, they're whatever. And so they can't defend their view, but you can impose your view on them. And that's what's happening right now in the University of California. This poor woman is going to be eliminated because the transgendered people can impose their views as to what is the truth. Well, in my opinion, there's no evidence exists that you can be born into the wrong body. And so what they're doing is they're letting a man who declares himself to be a woman tell a lie, and they are turning that lie into truth. And that's exactly what's going on. And that's what the doctor in England was faced with. They take a lie and they say, oh, yes, but you see, a privileged person is telling this lie, and therefore that means it's true.
We have to accept it, basically.
And you are challenging that. So that proves that you're transphobic or whatever phobic they want you to be. And so that's the situation. In other words, a tiny, minuscule percentage of the population is taking away the voice of everyone else. We're not allowed to say anything. And then this comes back to the question you asked me about Trump. Is he xenophobic? Trump is sticking up for the core population. It's the first time it's happened. Who tried to do it years ago? Enoch Powell. They destroyed him. Yeah, Marine Le Pen tried to do it in France. They want to put her in jail. So don't you think it's strange that the white leadership of the white core populations of the white nations never represent the white core population?
On these issues, I have to agree with you. I mean, I'm trying to be the devil's advocate here. I mean, I think ultimately, again, I've got to say that, you know, you talked about Enoch Powell and Marine Le Pen, and you've known me long enough now, Paul. You and I, we say what we feel, and we don't care what's popular to say and what's not popular to say. I think that these people, Marine Le Pen and Powell, whether they realise it or not, I think they're used to divide people. I'm not saying I disagree with them on every issue. I find agreement on some issues with these people, including the ones you've talked about here. But I think ultimately it divides us, and I think it's meant to. But I want to ask you this, because
I disagree with that.
You disagree? Go on.
They're used to divide people. I think who's used to divide people are the transgendered and the homosexuals and the radical feminists who want to castrate white men and who declare white DNA to be an abomination. They are the ones who produce Marine Le Pen.
But haven't we always had them, Paul?
Otherwise, there wouldn't be any such person.
Well, you know what? That's an interesting point, that, because I've often thought to myself, we've always had people. I mean, I remember when I was a young boy, I'm 44 now, there was a man who dressed as a woman in our neighbourhood, which was very unusual because it was a Catholic small town, Waterford City in Ireland, very unusual thing. But they were there, and gay and lesbian folks were there. Maybe they were always there, but maybe now certain other people are amplifying this stuff in order to drive us crazy. That's just my opinion, Paul. It doesn't mean it's true. It's just my theory. That's all. What do you think?
Yeah, well, today it's organized.
Amplified, yeah. Absolutely.
This guy you're talking about was not organized.
No.
Well, he was part, but today it's organized. And so...
What about the First Amendment, Paul? Because you talked about that university teacher, that lecturer. We would often look at the United States and we would think, whatever criticisms we might have of the United States, it's difficult to fire somebody. I'm not saying it is now, but I would have always thought you have that First Amendment protection. Surely the teacher, the feminist writer, is protected by the First Amendment when she says, I don't think it's possible to be born in the wrong body. The law is on her side, Paul, no? Should be.
Probably not.
But not.
Because the chairman of her department told all the protesters that, in her opinion, they could file a Title IX civil rights action against her. You see, the civil rights thing is full of inconsistencies that are used to attack the First Amendment. So if expressing your First Amendment rights distresses a privileged minority, you've committed a hate crime. And you don't any longer have the right of free speech. So that's what's happened. In other words, the First Amendment, okay, fine, but we now have all these, they're called preferred minorities and privileged minorities. And so if you say something using the First Amendment that distresses the poor dears,
yeah, that's what's happening here too.
You are in trouble for opening your mouth, and all of a sudden your First Amendment rights have disappeared. They no longer exist.
It's happening here, yeah.
That's the way it really works.
Do you know what we've done here? We've labelled more and more groups of people as vulnerable groups, Paul. That's the official term. That's the term that's used by government agencies, vulnerable groups. And they announce new vulnerable groups all the time. And of course, when a group has been designated as a vulnerable group, it means, as you've already explained, I don't need to repeat what you've said, but it basically means you can't engage them. You certainly can't criticise their core values, their ideas. You can't speak about it because they're a vulnerable group. And I think ultimately it'll be used to even shut down criticism of the elites and the establishment. And I wonder, is that where all this is going? Right now, Paul Craig Roberts is our guest, paulcraigroberts.org. Paul is the former US Assistant Secretary of the Treasury. Top man is Paul Roberts. And Paul can go on to his website and write very interesting and very well-researched articles. But I wonder, Paul, is this agenda ultimately going to lead to researchers like you being shut down? Is that where it goes eventually?
Well, you know, Google can do that at any time. So they can already do that, and they don't even need an excuse. I think this whole thing of vulnerable, this is a lie, because these people that they say are vulnerable are by far the least vulnerable.
Yeah.
The vulnerable person is the doctor who was removed. The vulnerable person is the white feminist who's being removed. The vulnerable person isn't this woman something Yosef. You know, it sounds like a straight out of terrorism name.
Right, yeah.
This woman is certainly not vulnerable. She is bringing down her former teacher, because the former teacher said something, not in the classroom, not in the university, but in a tweet that Yosef finds distressing. And because poor, vulnerable Yosef is distressed, she can destroy the career of, what's her name?
A good woman.
Tanner's the last name.
Yeah.
She can destroy her career because, I'm distressed because she expressed a view I don't like. Well, these are not vulnerable people. You got to be stupid as shit to think those people are vulnerable. They have unlimited power. And they exercise the power. They just axed the doctor. They're now axing a feminist woman at the University of California. They can axe whoever they want. They are the least vulnerable people. They have the power.
And you know, in the UK at the moment, Paul, there isn't a group of people doing better than Jews. And I know I'll be hammered for saying that, but I don't care. I made this point yesterday. Jews are protected. Jews have done well in the UK and thrived, and more power to them. I have nothing against it. But yet there is a narrative being written in the UK press that Jews are not safe in the UK Labour Party, the left-wing party, that Jews are not safe in society. From what I can see, Jews are doing very well and are disproportionately represented in the, I suppose, in the UK pillars of power, in the media, in the city. Jews are doing okay for themselves, and again, more power to them. I have no problem, I have no problem, I should say, with that. But yet, the narrative is being created, Paul, that they are an endangered species, and they're not. And they're doing this to bring down Jeremy Corbyn, I think partly because Corbyn said if Labour forms the next government that he will recognise Palestine. So you make a very good point there. Are you watching that with any interest, Paul, what's happening to Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party?
Yes. Look, the reason the Jews say that they're going to be persecuted, they've always said that, because then you can't hold them accountable. And so you can't criticize them. And so that's what it's all about. It's about we can do whatever we want, and you can't say anything about it, because if you do, you're anti-Semitic and you're going to burn us in an oven. So that is the situation they have set. This is why pedophiles like this Epstein guy can get away with it for 20, 30, 40 years because he's Jewish.
Now,
and you see what I mean? And the first time they brought him to trial, they suppressed all the evidence and made a deal such that no one could ever be persecuted under this Epstein thing again. So now they're going to have a court rule that the Justice Department deal with Epstein was illegitimate and it wasn't a deal consistent with law before they can do anything about it. So you have the whole power that they get from this when they say, "Oh, we're vulnerable," this makes them untouchable, and that's what they want to be, and that's what they are. You can't say anything about them. If you have a job, you'd be fired.
You're gone, yeah. If you criticize, yeah, you're right.
You're gone. If you're a university professor, look what they've done to Finkelstein. They destroyed Finkelstein's university career. What was the other guy from Virginia Tech that went to the University of Illinois?
I remember him. I interviewed him, and his name escapes me. I remember him. Yeah, you're right.
Starts with an S.
Yes, I know who it is. Yeah.
Sabita, or something like this. Sabita, something. And all they did was make some criticisms of the way the Israelis are treating the Palestinians. And so that's enough to get your career destroyed. So, and, Finkelstein was at a Catholic university. He was voted tenure by the university. And the Catholic president of the Catholic university collapsed to the Jews and blocked the
and Dershowitz, yeah.
And at the University of Illinois, this is a secular state university, and they collapse.
And we're talking about Zionists here. Most Jews haven't a clue, of course. I mean, we're surrounded by, maybe not surrounded by, but there are Jewish people in my neighbourhood. They do their thing. They go to the synagogue. They go to work. They pay their taxes like everybody else. They haven't a clue, of course. This is a state of Israel and a political Zionism thing, isn't it, Paul? That's how I see it, anyway. That's where the power is. That's
the origin of it, yeah.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the Zionists expect all the Jews to go along with it, and it is true. Over time, the Jewish opposition to Zionism is shrinking. It used to be Zionists were kind of always under attack by lots of Jews who thought that this is not right and it's going to come out bad and so on. But the Zionists have prevailed. They've been successful. They've got Britain and the U.S. always doing exactly what they want. And so this has made it hard for the Jewish opposition to Zionism to continue, so that more and more and more of the Jews, whether they're Zionists or not, they no longer oppose it.
You see what happened to Professor Finkelstein, as you mentioned, and to others who've stood up and, taken on the lobby in the US and in the UK, and of course that would put them off. I've had a rabbi on several times from Manchester. He's an Orthodox rabbi, and he's as critical of Israel and Zionism as anybody I've ever met, and he suffered physical attacks here in Manchester. He's somebody, Paul, that you'd be very interested in hearing about. We're nearly about to run out of time. It's flown by, Paul. It's been a while. We would normally speak about once every month or every 6 weeks. I've had a big move and all the craziness that goes with that, moving the studio, and I had to take time out for that. But I'm delighted that you're back on. I read paulcraigroberts.org all the time. I'm not just saying that. I do always read him. You should bookmark Paul. Subscribe to his newsletter, by the way. And when you find terrifically written and researched articles, do support it financially, because if you don't, it's not going to be around for much longer. Paul Craig Roberts. Paul, I'll give you the final word. Delighted that you were back on with us today. Huge interest in our conversation on Twitter. Lots of tweets on it. Thanks for giving us your time. Final word to you, my friend, and we'll wrap it up today. Great work, by the way, on paulcraigroberts.org.
All right. Well, we're both right that disunity is what gives the establishment its power. And there are many things causing disunity. Its identity politics is now institutionalized in the United States, in the UK, in France. And what identity politics does, it turns the population against itself. If you have a multicultural or a diverse population. So the minute you have a diverse population, you are subjected to the use of identity politics by the elite to keep the people so disunited that they cannot exercise any control over the government.
Brilliant work, Paul. Thanks for coming back today. Have a terrific summer. Come back again next month unless you're on holiday. And if you are, we'll speak in September. Always appreciate your time, my friend. Thanks again.
Certainly welcome. Look forward to it.
Cheers, Paul. The excellent Paul Craig Roberts live on the Richie Allen Show for Thursday, July 18th, 2019. Do go to paulcraigroberts.org. Do subscribe to the newsletter and share the excellent articles that you find there. The brilliant Paul Craig Roberts. Music from Iggy Pop. When I come back, I'll read your comments. Don't go anywhere.
I'm a real wild one. Wild one.
Iggy Pop on the Richie Allen Show. Real Wild Child. Welcome back to the programme. Coming up for 4 minutes past the hour. Thursday show. Been a great week. Top guests on the programme this week. Hope you've enjoyed it. Don't forget, every weekday morning at 9:30, I go onto YouTube. So I do. And on YouTube at 9:30 a.m, I tend to talk about the UK newspaper front pages and all the rest of it. All right. Where am I here? Oh, yeah, there you are. Good. So, thanks for the tweets. Loads of them. I'm going to press on. Go to Richie Allen. Go to twitter.com where it says search Twitter. Put Richie Allen Show, all one word. If you do that, you'll see what people are tweeting to me. I'm not ignoring your tweets, but I've got to press on. Because there's lots I want to talk about with my next guest. Lots, I tells you. He's written a fantastic article. And I'm going to tweet out links to it. He published it on the website he co-founded, the Swamp.Media. The article is entitled "The Epstein Associate Nobody's Talking About, the IDF-Linked Bond Girl Who's Infiltrating the UK NHS." The article reads like a spy novel. It really does. It reads like the bones of, or the synopsis of, a spy novel. And reading it earlier this week, as I did, and cross-referencing as I do, because when you read an article as detailed and as exhaustively researched as that, you've got to cross-reference the stuff. And I did. And the boy's done his homework. It really is terrific. Let's welcome to the programme. He was on, but it's been ages since he was on. A couple of years anyway. He's a singer, songwriter, political investigative journalist. He advocates the legalisation of cannabis, which is no bad thing. And he leads the United Wales Independence Party. But he also writes, as I've just said, on the Swamp.Media. And this article about an ex-model who's become a fantastically successful financier and hedge fund impresario, who's worked alongside Israeli state intelligence operatives, who's flown on the Jeffrey Epstein plane Lolita Express, who's been successful enough to be one of the chief, I suppose, architects of bringing the World Cup to Germany in 2006. She's involved in infiltrating the National Health Service. She really is. Who is this woman, and why, until very recently, had I not really heard a dicky bird about her? Let's welcome to the programme Johnny Vedmore. Johnny, welcome back. How are you?
Hello, Richie. Really nice to hear you. Really nice to be here. I'm excited. I'm
excited, my friend. It does read like the synopsis of a brilliant spy thriller, your article. It's excellent. I'm going to retweet links to it now on the Swamp.Media. Exhaustively researched, my friend. And I do go through articles like yours. And because I'm a curmudgeonly old bastard, I like to try and find flaws. And I like to try and find instances where you've added 2 and 2 together to make 5, so that when you come on, I can have a go at you. But I can't. This is really interesting stuff. Reveal this woman. Who is this woman?
Well, she's a really interesting one. I should probably note first, I'm definitely not the co-founder of Swamp.Media.
Are you not?
Like to be. No. I write on there. There's Focal.media who cover a load of different magazines and allow independent people like me to get out there, and they're good guys. I like them. Nicole Junkermann. Wow, what a woman. I knew she was interesting when I first started looking into her. There was much more information back then on who she was, because articles have disappeared from search results. So Google has gone down from being like, you'd have like 8, 9, 10 pages of searches 2 years ago when you put in the name Nicole Junkermann. Now it's like 4 pages of search results, and lots have been omitted or taken out completely. And she's extremely interesting, described as an entrepreneur, an investor in real estate, technology, and sports media. Once upon a time, it was just really sports media technology. Born in Germany back in 1975, so she's coming up to mid-40s now. She's extremely well educated. She went to the University of Monaco, which I'm sure you know. Monaco is the home of tax evasion and where all of the people who are right at the top hang out. They really do like it. Have you ever been to Monaco?
No, I've not. No, but like you, as far as the tax shelter goes and the tax dodgers, I know a bit about it, but I've never been there. Have you been there?
I went there once. I got paid to go over there by someone who owned a games company. I was going out with his wife's sister, and they wanted us to come over to look after the child for an hour and a half.
Mind-blowing.
And over there is just all supercars and everything. Everybody's like 7 foot tall women and just people with their coats hanging off the back of their shoulders.
Right. Yeah.
You know, you really get a feel that there's like a lot of dodgy people hanging around in Monaco. But she studied business administration in the International University of Monaco, and then she went on to do management development at Harvard in America. So she obviously well educated, and around that time, she is caught. I should say, when she had finished her first degree, she had already co-founded a company called WinnieMax, which was an online gaming platform. Early before online gaming platforms were really regulated, etc. So she already was a successful businesswoman. I mean, as soon as she had graduated, she went on to go to Harvard Business School. And at the end of that, that's where all of the links start coming up. So that's where she rode on Jeffrey Epstein's Lolita Express in 2002. Now, that's an interesting journey in itself, as you know from the article, because normally Jeffrey Epstein liked to fly with his entourage, or he used a plane to bring people to him, and he wouldn't be on the plane. Now and again, he'd fly the plane just alone. But on this occasion, it was just him and Nicole Junkermann, who's really not in his age interest.
Yeah.
And they met up in 2002. They flew from Paris to Birmingham, and they were there for 2 days in our wonderful country. I've not been able to find out what they were doing, but it was very interesting. Now, shortly after, she's got set up. She became I think it was a 40% shareholder in Infront Sports and Media, which was a newly set up company in 2002. And the chief executive of the company was Philip Blatter, who was Sepp Blatter's son. And her company managed to get the rights for, of course, like you mentioned, the 2006 German World Cup, all of the media rights for all around the world, which would have been a massive coup. And of course, it was seen as corrupt nepotism because
of course,
connection between the Blatters.
The Blatters, yeah. And you know what? Can I just interject there?
Go on.
It's very important to go back to what you said about 5 minutes ago. It's impossible to find. Well, it's not impossible, but it's very difficult And in fact, there isn't very much there, as you've said. It seems to have been purged. You can't... This was obviously a huge player, this woman, at that time. And you talked about her going to Birmingham Airport on the Lolita Express. You can't find anything in the press during that period about this woman.
I've been looking a lot.
Wow.
I mean, I'm not just... It's really difficult. It's easy to go back and look at a period of time, especially afterwards when things were reported. Because I think in the past we can assume that things were reported a lot slower than the future. So I've looked a few weeks in the future as well. I'm trying to trace where Ehud Barak was around that time as well. I'm trying to see what his movements were, but that's another secretive person.
We'll come back to him. We'll come back to him, of course, in a few minutes. Yeah.
Maybe there's a link up there, but whatever happened, this meeting was a very private meeting between the now infamous Jeffrey Epstein, who I mean he wasn't infamous to most of the people in our circles like 10 years ago. He was known all around the independent media circles as being one of the most influential businessmen within high. He was a really high class fella, but he was really secretive, and he put his fingers in all the pies.
Yeah.
So it's not just, it's not just Trump and Clinton there, but there's a lot of people who you will find connections to Jeffrey Epstein, not just through the flight manifesto, Lolita Express, or his famous Black Book, which is well worth a look through because names like Tony Blair and Alistair Campbell come up in Jeffrey Epstein's little Black Book, as well as lots of other clues to his connections to other people.
He went under the radar, didn't he? And you addressed this question yourself in your article. This is why I love balanced writing. You addressed the question of whether Junkermann was trying to get a few bob out of Jeffrey Epstein. Now, at that stage, she was doing extraordinarily well for herself, as you've written in the article. But her going away with him and travelling with him, you even addressed the question that maybe, I know it becomes unlikely when you go on and you find out more and more, but maybe she was trying to get him to invest in something.
Yep. There's always a possibility that he was maybe one of the other investors in the FIFA World Cup bid that happened like around that time. I mean, that's very possible. She was trying to raise money, and she always goes around and she's raising hundreds of millions, not just millions. She's raising hundreds of millions all of the time. This woman is really up. She's probably like, three echelons away from the top. She seems to be like really, really connected. What were you just saying? Sorry.
No, good. No, you've answered that. Both of them under the radar at that particular point. But Epstein really shouldn't have been under the radar. And again, with Epstein's money and his connections, the fact that if you go back to the UK press of the early to mid 2000s, as I did, there's not much about Jeffrey Epstein.
No. There's like one article on Jeffrey Epstein that really come out.
And that's not right, Johnny. That is not right, because this guy was a major player.
Oh, yeah. But you can imagine that they were able to... He disguised himself in some respect, because what he used to do back in the early noughties was say he was he was an investor in science. He really liked the future of science, and he I think he helped in set up TEDx. So all the TEDx talks and etc. And he hung around with a lot of the people like I think Dawkins, Pinker, people like that. The famous scientific minds of the time. He tried to wrap himself around with like very clever people all around him, so he would look clever. But a lot of the people who talked about Jeffrey Epstein during that period say that he actually come across as quite stupid.
We've got Johnny Vedmore on the line. I've just tweeted a link to this article. You have to read this. We're going to get deeper into this now with Johnny. It's on the Swamp.Media. And if I know many of my listeners have come across Johnny before. He's a singer-songwriter and an investigative journalist. He also leads the United Wales Independence Party. This is important stuff. Nicole Junkermann, who nobody's ever heard of, but has rubbed shoulders with former Israeli prime ministers, former Israeli intelligence agents, the IDF, some of the richest and most powerful people in the world. The UK Health Secretary, the UK Health Department. We're going to get into that as well with with Johnny Vedmore. This is massive stuff. This. So take it on then. So she went on this Lolita Express a couple of times. We talked about the second time her trip to Birmingham and what that might have meant, and what it may have meant. Take it on a bit from there, Johnny.
Well, Epstein was well connected with Harvard. The next year, he would give $30 million donation with Harvard. So she was just coming from Harvard. So it's likely that he was maybe trying to recruit her in some way, shape, or form, in the same way that she was probably trying to get whatever she wanted or whatever she could from him. In this, but over the next few years, what they would do is what Nicole Junkermann would do would be buy businesses. By tech companies. Tech, obviously, I mean, it was obvious the internet was the future by the early noughties, and she really started investing in lots of technology, apps and etc. Really going crazy with her purchases and her investments past 2011. So
for herself, Johnny, or for other people? This is a great question, I think.
Well, I'm not sure, because some of it, of course, is like good purchasing. Some of it, like Spoon Guru, CoinDrum, OptioPay, Grabio. These are companies that some of them have been sold on since to Google and people. These are companies that obviously you want to invest in. But some of the companies are really notable for technology. Okrin is a software modeling it describes itself as creating a software, like an AI software for modeling population. Sentinel Technologies is a distribution platform for AI. So it's like an early artificial intelligence I suppose operating system, sort of software, etc., what you run things off. Grok, which is an integrated circuits for machine learning. So that's again to do with AI. Then there's all the relatively innocent companies like Dollar Shave Club that people have seen probably. If they've ever watched Ben Shapiro's show. He advertises them quite a lot. Relate IQ, Brewhouse Brewery, lots of different companies, but there was one certain company that really, I mean, it is completely, it goes against all of the rest of the purchases she made. It really is Reporty Homeland Security, it was first called.
This is massive now. Let's talk about this. Is Reporty Homeland Security. Of course, when I read the article,
it's now called Carbyne 911.
Carbyne 911. When I read the article, I thought it was a typo, but it was Reporty Homeland Security. It's now called Carbyne 911. And she invested a lot of money in this, or she bought this company?
Well, how they invested in it, I don't know. She's definitely director on the board, alongside, of course, the ex-prime minister and ex-chief of special operations for the Israeli Defense Force, Ehud Barak. Every person who's on the board, chairman, people who are operating in it, have all had an Israeli army background, and they've all been pretty big players. The
14th chief of staff of the Israeli Defense Forces, Barak, as you said. You've listed these people in the article. Cross-referenced the stuff myself. You're absolutely bang on. This is great investigative journalism, Johnny. This is top stuff, mate. And I'm not just saying that. Right. This is brilliant, mate. We're talking about Nicole Junkermann, woman who the vast majority of people who are following the Epstein story, who are glued to it, won't have heard of this woman. But her relationship with Epstein and her associations with others who also had relationships with Epstein, including Ehud Barak, who's embarrassed several times by photographs appearing in newspapers of him trying to hide his face as he walked into Epstein's apartment. This is massive. So Carbyne 911, this company and the board, including Barak and other Israel Defense Forces people. Why is this important, Johnny? This is really good stuff.
Carbyne 911 is marketed as an app that is really fundamentally to get between us and the emergency services. So you get this app, and instead of simply phoning a police or ambulance or fire brigade, you can start reporting it, and they'll do that. And all of your information can be transmitted, including information from your phone, your location, data about you, whatever going on in your camera, but also apparently all of the data from everything around. So even if parked cars are there, they'll be able to access that.
God.
And they'll be able to. Basically, it's a way. Back in the late 90s, there was a company called. It still exists. I mean, it's still a big company. It's called Amdocs. And back in the late 90s, this company infiltrated. I will use that word because it is what they did. Infiltrated the American phone system. The Israelis needed to get a massive amount of information on phone calls happening in America, and they didn't know how to do it. So Amdocs got the contract for being in between the phone company and the customer by being the billing. People who do all of the billing for the 26 or 27 phone companies all around America. So all of the big boys, not one did not use Amdocs to bill, and they were able to pass that back to the intelligence. So they've been on big data operations for a long time. And now with the internet booming and the obvious modern tech being all about big data, this is what they're doing. They're getting trying to get in between data, the people's personal data, and the service that holds that information is supposed to be secret. It's supposed to hold that information confidentially.
This is a bombshell for most of our listeners who haven't yet read this article. Did you just hear what Johnny Vedmore said there? This woman invested heavily in or bought a company called Carbyne 911, which is now known as Carbyne, which has an app, which basically means that if you have the app, you wouldn't phone the emergency services if you had an emergency. You would use the app, you would launch the app, and the app then would start, as Johnny said, engaging the emergency services on your behalf, but also gathering any number of data points about you, about where you are, your situation. And this is beyond Big Brother. It's beyond it. And the directors of this organisation, Nicole Junkermann, friend of Jeffrey Epstein, the other directors include the former Prime Minister of Israel and heads of the military intelligence in Israel and former IDF guys. This is bombshell stuff.
It's big to note that Pinchas Bukris, who's former deputy commander of the IDF operations unit and former commander of the IDF 8200 cyber intelligence unit.
Do you hear that? Brigadier Pinchas Bukris, the former deputy commander of an elite IDF operations unit, as Johnny has written, and commanded the IDF 8200 cyber intelligence unit, is behind
He is
this.
one of the directors alongside Nicole Junkermann.
You have uncovered something that should send shockwaves through the National Security Agency and the CIA.
Oh, the CIA definitely, because they're currently the place where they've been really targeting. They've a guy called Towell. I can't remember what his first name is, but he's one of the members of the Carbyne board, and he's been recruited because he's got a specific knowledge about the 5 boroughs of New York. And so I think what they're trying to do is start this off in New York to spread out, and that's what their hope hopefully was rather than is, because I'm not sure that they if you expose something like this, they can continue. His name's Elliot Towell. And he's an American, I believe, who's working for. He started as a retailer and gained a strategic understanding of New York's 5 boroughs. This laid the foundation for his unique grasp of real estate market, and his expertise has enabled him to become one of the largest luxury retail landlords in the city. And he knows New York very well. So he's been brought on. He's the most recent member of the board to be brought on to what I think try and start this project off in New York.
Nobody knows about this, Johnny. Nobody has written about this in the United States in tech circles. Nobody. That the Israelis.
I have sent a lot. This information around in the past week and a half, and there is mostly silence.
The Israelis are promoting an app to people where they wouldn't ring 911, and if it was in this country, they wouldn't ring 999. They would launch the app and let the app deal with the emergency while the app is gathering reams and reams and reams, and I know it's not reams, I know it's measured in bytes maybe, of data. Terabytes on you, on your environment, on everything.
We're about to enter into a world of quantum computing, and no one really realizes what that means. No one in the world quite grasps it. Even the people who understand quantum computing don't understand how far away the barrier
define it, Johnny.
Are going to be.
What is quantum computing? What's the dummies version of the explanation for me?
We use computers that use binary code, so 0 1 0 1 0 1 0 1 1 1 0, etc. Quantum computing has 0 1, some sort of manifestation of both. And then a selection of anything you could possibly think of. So it means that quantum computing is so far above what we can kind of understand with technology and the power of technology that they say it's going to bypass what is called security. So all of the things like blockchain technology, all of the things that are coming up now that are seen as extremely secure, once this new form of technology, which is really not only on its way, it was already being built 10 years ago. We're right on the edge of quantum computing. So I think a lot of this tech stuff is these people these big people are fighting against each other to an extent to try and grab up as much data access as possible.
No.
Whatever comes next.
Wow, Johnny Vedmore is our guest, and am I to conclude without knowing the answer? Are Israeli computer geniuses ahead of the game on quantum computing?
I would assume so. I think that what they've done in one day when we can see how all of the cards played and who was involved in what, and one day all the truths will out. It'll be a really interesting thing to see how their motivation to gather intelligence data was so successful, because they really, really do a good job of it. They do a good job of buying things up, finding the right people, using the right awful, terrible techniques to get to their ends.
Staggering stuff, this. I mean, it really is. It's breathtaking stuff, this, that we come in with Nicole Junkermann, who's in her mid-40s, beautiful woman, educated in Monaco and in Harvard, and smart, learns 5 languages, and becomes very successful as managing portfolios and investing money. Meets up with Jeffrey Epstein, travels on the Lolita Express on several occasions. Inexplicably, nobody seems to know what they were doing in Birmingham and in Paris. A lot of very successful investments in tech on behalf of herself or others, who knows. All this is documented in Johnny's excellent article. I've tweeted it 3 times now, by the way. We're going to talk now about the NHS in a second, but I just want you to think on again what Johnny's already just told you there. This woman is involved in a company which has changed names. Originally, Reporty Homeland Security, now Carbyne 911. It's known as Carbyne. It's a global leader in public safety technology, and it's a call handling platform app that allows you to stream any ongoing emergency directly to the responding emergency services. I'm reading now from Johnny's article, obviously, because I'm nowhere near as eloquent as that, right? So that's Johnny's article. And Junkermann is involved in this. Ehud Barak, the former Prime Minister of Israel, former IDF guys, including Brigadier Pinchas Bukris, the former deputy commander of an elite IDF operations unit and former commander of the IDF 8200 cyber intelligence unit. Also a guy called Amir Elikai. They're all involved in this, and they want people in the US to use this app to stream an emergency they're involved in, rather than calling the emergency services themselves. It's a Trojan horse, Johnny.
It is indeed. It is indeed. And this is how Israeli intelligence works. It's how it's always worked. It's been out of control for maybe its entire existence, and it works along the idea of Trojan horses, just putting in some form of getting the asset bought before people even know the asset's necessary.
You've shared this with quite a few people. Has any other? I mean, look, I'm independent alternative media, decent, but ultimately minimal audience. You know, much as we might like to think we're reaching a lot of people, we reach a lot of people for the indie media, but largely it's difficult. Has anybody from The Guardian, The Telegraph, any of these papers said, right, Johnny, we've had a look at this, yeah, let's let us reprint the article? Has anybody come back to you?
Not one. I mean, that's not a surprise. From the first time I came on here was telling the story of Theresa May's father. Sorry, I'm being attacked by a cat at the same time.
Good man.
I was telling the story of Theresa May's father.
That's right.
And, his link to John Bodkin Adams, a serial killer, and maybe why she was trying to cover up the independent child's sexual abuse inquiry, and within with my own. Just trying to get it out there, with help from people like yourself, Ed Opperman in America and stuff. I managed to get over 250,000 people read that article in a very short amount of time.
That's brilliant.
And yet not one of the actual mainstream people come anywhere near me, and they won't because when you. Part of the thing of working in the independent media world, like trying to find a place in there, is you need to actually realize that if you produce a story, like I produced a story which was about Philip May's link to the missiles, the JASM missiles that were used in the Syria attack.
Yeah.
I got it out there early. It got shared all around the place. And then Evolved Politics come along and just took chunks of that article out and wrote their own article. And then the next day, Russia Today took out. No one mentions you. No one says anything. Even the independent media are working against each other. So you have to find a story that's so horrific that no one else will go anywhere near it because of either danger to themselves or the fear of being called a conspiracy theorist or etc. But all I do is get all of the evidence I possibly can. If I write an opinion piece, I'm going to say, this isn't my opinion. If I'm writing a piece that's like this, an investigation, it is completely all about following the evidence, showing the evidence, and letting people make up their own mind on this.
Yes, excellent, Johnny. And a lot of the independent media is wretched. And I don't say that because I want to place myself at the top of the pile, that I'm some sort of special. I'm not. I'm a mouthy Irish guy with skills because I learned those skills in commercial and national media. So I don't try and put myself at the top of the pile, but they are wretched because you'll find in the independent media, some of the more successful ones will take that information and try to claim it as their own. Right.
Mm-hmm. And not only that, is that
rubbish.
A lot of them have been purchased up by the big boys. So they already are funded by people who they're supposed to be railing against. But it's all very sneaky, very sneaky.
It's rubbish. It's rubbish behaviour, and it's not journalism. You know, cite your sources. Programs like this one only exist so that we can hear from men and women like you, Johnny. I don't research. I'm dependent on people like you doing this sort of work. Nicole Junkermann, her relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, Carbyne 9/11, known as Carbyne, a Trojan horse app. Wow. Before we ask the inevitable question, are these people Mossad? And I know you can't answer that. She's now, Nicole Junkermann, she's now formed relationships with UK Secretaries of State, and they want into the UK, don't they?
Oh, yes, they do. The new tech world of AI and etc. that's going to come with the expanse of our technology, which is just amazingly exponential now. It's going up in leaps and bounds, our technology. There's going to be a whole new infrastructure needed in the NHS, and how to get involved in that infrastructure early so you can be in between those places where all of that sensitive information or etc. is caught is by buying it up before people actually even know that it's needed or necessary. So we've got to talk about the Healthtech Advisory Board, headed by Matt Hancock, who's of course Secretary of State for Health and Social Care. And these group of people, I would, the first person I'd like to mention on the board of this, it gives you an idea of what I'm trying to say here, is Rachel Dunscombe, who was CEO of NHS Digital Academy and Director of Digital Salford Royal NHS Group. And she's called a technology evangelist. And have you ever heard of the term technology evangelist?
I have not, no. It's new to me, Johnny.
They find the tech before people know the tech is needed, and they find what tech is going to be needed on the next stage of computer upgrades. And then they go to companies and they convince companies to create that technology.
Wow.
So that's how, and that's moving fast all over the place. There's lots of technology evangelists, and they work for big companies. Now, she was working within the NHS, but as soon as she got onto the Healthtech Advisory Board, she joined a private enterprise called Class Arc Collaborative as their global non-US leader and senior evangelist. So she started to put her fingers in multiple pies. It seems like that's what this Healthtech Advisory Board does. Some of the people on there are just extremely interesting. I'll name a couple that I haven't mentioned in the article that much. Manoj Badal, who purchased an Indian Premier League team alongside one of Rupert Murdoch's children. What's his name? Lachlan Murdoch. He's got an OBE, of course. He's one of these tech pioneers. It seems sensible that people like this are involved in the Healthtech Advisory Board, because the Healthtech Advisory Board is described as a bunch of clinicians and etc. Clinicians, tech experts who are going to look at the future of the NHS. So they advise Matt Hancock on what the future of the NHS can be and how they can get involved in making that future possible and reality.
And it doesn't matter if it's Matt Hancock or if in a few weeks' time Johnson appoints somebody else. It doesn't matter who it is. I'm not trying to absolve Hancock. He's just a puppet. And that's how they do it. Brilliantly laid out by you in your piece. And every bit of information about me, you, our families, our friends would be up for grabs by these people. Everything.
Yep. I think the best way to describe it, which I say in the article, is that like even the model of the wireless pacemaker that's keeping you alive, and that's fundamentally if someone wants to offer you, if an intelligence service wants to offer you, and they look at your medical records, they've got a good way. They've got the head start on making it look like an accident.
Could it explain? Unbelievable. That's right. The wireless pacemaker down to the model number. Do something to you. Bang, you're gone. It looks like natural causes. This is not conspiracy theory, people. This is real. What about what's happening to Jeremy Corbyn? It's not just happening to Corbyn, it's happening to a lot of people. I've had serious trouble with them in the last few weeks. I had a bit of trouble with them, and I had threats. One of the threats made against me was very serious. I've been informed for talking about Israel. And I'm not important, but Corbyn is getting it now. And I'm no big fan of his. You and I argued about Corbyn before. I'm a socialist, and I think I'm a real one. I'm not sure about Jezza, but I'm an honest guy, and what they're doing to him is disgraceful. There is no endemic anti-Semitism. Could it possibly be connected to what you've been writing about in this brilliant article?
Well, I think that the Israel intelligence has infiltrated nearly every part of our society in some way, shape or form. And every time you investigate it and look into it, you find a load of people acting in a way that is obviously as propaganda for the state to stop people questioning what's happening over in Israel and Palestine. I mean, it's so ridiculously obvious. You've talked about the lobby and the Al Jazeera movie and Oborn's piece back in the late 2009, 2010 on the conservative friends of Israel. But any investigator out there, any person who wants to be an independent investigator, wants to get the truth out, you just have to look for these pile of corrupt people who are all hanging around in the same place, and then look for their connections. Yeah. And you'll soon see that they're infiltrating not just one or two places, it's multiple places, and it is Israeli intelligence. It can only be described as that panorama the other day with someone who's worked in the Israeli embassy, and it's
outrageous, isn't it? I mean, imagine the BBC, and of course we could spend time talking about it, but we won't. Why McDonnell and Corbyn haven't gone to town on the fact that this young lad with the curly hair was...
I'd be happy to talk about it at some point, because I know there's always a lot to talk about.
Oh no, we will. But, listen, I'm just saying today, because we're going to end up in 10 minutes time running out of time. Listen, come back in a couple of weeks and we'll talk about that by all means. No, I'm just saying, it's an open goal for McDonnell and Corbyn to say, listen, look at this curly-headed guy. I don't know if his name is Alex something or other. There he is with Joan Ryan in the lobby. He's Israeli embassy staffer, intern, employee, whatever. They were caught, talking about taking bribes to get rid of people like Alan Duncan and people like that. And now all of a sudden he rocks up on the Panorama programme. Why Corbyn and McDonnell are not going to town on it is anybody's guess. But then again, I don't know.
The BBC have a complete, since probably about 2010, they have completely and utterly given way to the Israeli lobby. That's what they've done themselves. They are being lobbied regularly. They have been through all of their time. If you go look at, there's many articles back in the 90s and the noughties about how there's lots of pressure on the BBC from the Israeli government all of the time. Around the time that the Cameron government got in, and eventually James Harding took over as BBC News, it's been pretty clear that the bias has been. It's almost like they know the BBC is coming to an end, and
that's right.
They can no longer excuse the license.
No longer excuse it. And you're aware of Gilad's article. Gilad interviewed a 35-year editor at the BBC. Gilad Atzmon, the jazz saxophonist. Zionists and some Jewish people in the UK hate Gilad. They think he's racist. I leave people make up their own mind what they think of him. I like him. I've always liked him. I've interviewed him for many years. But that's a genuine interview. This guy obviously can't put his name in the public domain because he's worried he'll be destroyed. But he said that it's complete capitulation. You put it more eloquently than I did, Johnny, as to the Zionist influence at the BBC. They don't want to talk about it. And again, I'm not important at all. But obviously, the producers of the David Baddiel forthcoming documentary want to speak to me to try and somehow make me look like a rabid, baldy, crazy lunatic.
David Baddiel, the man who you can easily go and put in David Baddiel blacked up, and his virtue signaling falls apart straight away when you see him dressed up as a Jamaican and being completely racist on TV. He's such a modern day hypocrite. I used to love him when I was young. He was good. Today was a brilliant live show. The Mary Whitehouse Experience are brilliant. They were telling the truth. They were speaking truth all of the time. But really, David Baddiel is pretty obviously one of the many people who are caught up in this. If they admit now, I think they're so far into the lie that if they admit it now, they know that they'll be exposed. So they just got to keep going in. It's a fallacy.
It's a fallacy. Now forget about me. Forget about. I brought up the Baddiel thing, not because again I'm not important. I brought it up to talk about you, because my proclamations about what the state of Israel does and how it operates are nothing. You've put some stuff in the public domain that trumps anything I've ever said or done, and this is no joke. You have to be careful, mate.
I know, and my girlfriend bloody hates it. There's so many reasons why I probably shouldn't be doing most of this. And to be perfectly honest, this story was something that I'd already started to write up about 2 years ago. But then it was just like, sit down, watch, keep an eye out. Eventually you realize in the past few years, the intense pressure from Israeli intelligence on our society is become not only exposed, but it pretends that it can't be seen. It's the emperor with no clothes on, Yeah. It pretends that no one can see what they're doing now. So they're just blatant. They're out there, and it's the fight of our time. In this country, in this world, everywhere around, what happens to the Palestinian people is one of the most important things for the future, and how our future societies will look upon what is possible and what is plausible and what is acceptable.
Johnny Vedmore is our guest, and I've put 3 or 4 links out to the article. It's been read over 250,000 times, and I have no doubt.
Oh, even my Theresa May article, it was read over 250,000 times. This one hasn't reached that number yet.
Has it not yet? Sure. But it will do. No. I mean, it will
I hope
do.
So.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are independent radio shows in the States with big audiences that should be bringing you on ASAP next week. Some of these people, they're interested. Some of them have their own problems with accusations made against them. I'm thinking of George Newry and people like that. But they've got huge audiences, and they should be getting you on, Johnny, to talk about it. It's hugely important. I mean, I can't overstate this. Johnny, of course, is a singer, songwriter. He's an investigative journalist. This article is on the Swamp.Media. Johnny's involved in the Welsh independence movement as well. I've talked about that earlier on. We've talked about Nicole Junkermann, her relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, which is incredible. Her relationship with Mossad people, intelligence agency people, former Israeli prime ministers, a tech company that has an app that is a Trojan horse, basically, that would expose those who use it. Well, it would expose the entire country and your data. We talked about this. You've got to...
I think they're looking to get in permission for data, like, given to them willy-nilly. Volans, like.
And what they've done in the States with this company Carbyne, they're trying to do here through the what did you call it again? This group, this tech group around the
Healthtech Advisory Board.
Healthtech Advisory Board.
I think it's even. It's obviously trying to get in between any emergency service and the massive amount of data that exists on people. That is one of the biggest danger. But it's not only. I'll give you a little hint and tip to some other investigators out there who want to go and research someone and want to have a look into someone, because I definitely don't have time for him, even though I come across him. On the Healthtech Advisory Board as well is Daniel Korski, CBE, former special advisor to David Cameron, sent over at the age of 28 to advise Hamid Karzai's government, in 2005. So at the age of 28 in 2005, during the Afghani war, went over to Hamid Karzai's government to advise them. He ran provisional reconstruction team in Basra in Iraq. He's on this Healthtech Advisory Board. He's one of the people who was embedded, as they say, with the Libyan rebels to report from the start of the country's civil war. Yeah. Like, for the spectator. I mean. Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of people on this advisory board that are obvious, like the money woman Michelle Brennan, I think her name is, and she's like the president of Johnson & Johnson, like one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world. Of course, they want in on the ground floor, but someone like Matt Hancock allows that to happen. This is almost like we want to sell off the NHS in the future because we're the Tory party. So let's sell off all of the tech before people even know they need it.
Before they're even aware of it. This is the thing. This is why we say Trojan horse. Johnny, we've talked a lot in recent weeks and months about Jeffrey Epstein and paedophilia and Bill Clinton and all these other famous men and women that have travelled with him. Mm-hmm. Are we talking Mossad? Are we talking possibly Epstein being used to keep the politicians of the world, ultimately puppets, to keep them in line by blackmailing them? How do you feel about that?
completely he is an intelligence operative. It's obvious that he got the sweetheart deal because they couldn't go near him. There's been quotes about it coming out. There'll be more to come out about that. And since the further revelations, since it's become since we've been allowed to talk about it on the mainstream, since it's been allowed for that to happen, there's been a lot of information linking him further with Mossad and maybe CIA. So it's very likely that someone like this doesn't just work for one side. If he's meeting up with foreign intelligence agencies as well, he's probably, happy to work for whoever has the same aims as he does.
I will, of course, take this particular conversation out of the edit tomorrow and upload it on its own with a picture of you, Johnny. And no, not at all. And a headline that you can choose, and we'll give it to all the researchers that we know in the independent media and see will some of them post it. Not to get me the traffic; it doesn't matter to me. I won't get anything out of it. But to for people to hear this, it's important.
One thing about another Epstein connection. Now, there's another. This is another thing that someone else can go research, go find out about. This is really interesting. In his little black book, under Jean-Luc Brunel, who was the supplier of a lot of these models, he made up this model agency so he could supply Epstein with these young girls. You can find that in the black book, the end of his email address was karinmodels.com. So that's Karin models.com. And that never finished. That never, when the sweetheart deal got made, they just changed. They changed the domain name and the name of the company, but they continued to have that modeling agency completely open. So this never stopped in 2011. He didn't stop doing what he was doing. There's a lot there to be investigated.
Will Epstein die, or will the more serious charges that should be levelled at him, will they just go away? Wow. If you were a betting man, that's a stupid question.
I like to have a gamble every now and again, but that one, I would assume that everybody thinks he's going to die, because how can you possibly leave someone like that alive when he's about to have to spill the beans about some of the biggest people who have ever controlled powerful governments?
Johnny, that's outstanding work, mate. Outstanding writing. Thanks for sharing it with us, and more power to you. When it's been ages since you were on, I'm the chief cook and bottle washer here, so when there's anything to say, do get in touch with me. I do say that to people on the programme like yourself, because stuff passes me by sometimes, because it's kind of crazy doing 6 days yourself.
Yeah, no, you do a lot of work, and it's appreciated by all the people who actually want to listen to somebody speaking to people who the mainstream will not speak to. We need to hear everybody's voice if we're going to have a conversation.
This should be the subject of a panorama report. This, nothing is more in the public interest in the UK than this, than what they've managed to do, this company in the States, and what they want to do here. It's vital, mate. Thanks for doing it. You've been listening to Johnny Vedmore. You'll hear Johnny again on the programme real soon. Thanks for doing it, Johnny, mate. Look after yourself. Keep an eye out for yourself now.
All right. Cheers, Richie. I will do.
Cheers,
Have
buddy.
a nice one.
You too. Bye for now. Terrific stuff from Johnny Vedmore. I will make I'll make an edit of that tomorrow and put it on YouTube. It's the worst thing in the world to do, put it on YouTube, because they shadow ban everything. We know they do. You know they do. You see what they do. I could show you a graphic now of all the Richie Allen shows and the newspaper reviews for the last few weeks, all demonetised, can't be monetised, not suitable, not suitable, not suitable. And despite the fact there are nearly 25,000 subscribers, there used to be many more, but it was deleted, the original channel. They don't get many views. So you need to help with this one. This is as important a conversation as you'll hear on this programme this year with Johnny Vedmore. Right, that's about it for the programme. Shout out to Johnny again, and to Paul Craig Roberts for joining me in the first hour. We're going to be back. I'll be back speaking with you on the YouTube channel tomorrow morning. I just want to say again, it's just absolutely unbelievable, isn't it? Carbyne, a company heavily invested in by Nicole Junkermann, who's got intimate relationships with people like Jeffrey Epstein. This company has among its directors former IDF guys. Brigadier Pinchas Bukris, who ran the IDF 8200 Cyber Intelligence Unit. Amir Elikai. As I said, the former Prime Minister Ehud Barak. And the company is basically a call handling platform app that stops you. Well, it actually does stop you because it persuades you not to call the emergency services, but to use them. And they will stream your ongoing emergency directly to the responding emergency services while they gather terabytes of data about you, your family, and your entire agency. Former Mossad people. Right? That's not bullshit. That's what's going on. And now they want into the NHS. And the current NHS Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, is enabling this in the NHS. Not a dicky bird from the mainstream media in the UK. Guy does an amazing bit of investigative journalism and puts it out there on the Swamp.Media. He sends it to every newspaper in the country and they don't want to touch it. Jesus. Crazy. Right. We'll speak again in the morning at 9:30 a.m, as I said, on the YouTube channel for the final newspaper review of the week. And thereafter, I'll be back with you on Sunday morning with Sunday View, where I do my own review of the Sunday newspapers, which is on the radio. It's a different thing. It's all getting very confusing now. Anyway, I'm going to leave you with the Foundation's optimistic bit of music to finish out the programme. Look after yourselves and one another, and we'll talk again tomorrow, as I've already said 5 times. So I don't need to repeat it. All right. Bye now.